It began when little Sarah was 6. She lived in a quiet Ohio town with her parents, Michael and Linda. She was a bright, playful child, funny, sharp, a little shy at school, but endlessly curious at home. One rainy afternoon, while coloring at the kitchen table, Sarah began humming, not a random tune, an old folk song neither parent recognized. When Linda asked her where she'd learned it, Sarah answered in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. "My other mom used to sing it." Linda chuckled nervously. "Other mom?" Sarah didn't look up from her crayons. "Yes, at my other house, near the water. It had blue curtains in the big room and a fireplace that was broken on the left side. Daddy, you never fixed it." Michael exchanged a look with his wife. They assumed she was role-playing, inventing stories like kids often do. But then Sarah began naming streets. "We lived on Maple, near the corner with Ash. Our neighbors had a dog that barked all night. My window faced the sea. I could smell the salt in the morning." Her parents froze. Their Ohio town was landlocked. No sea, no Maple Street nearby. That night, Sarah dreamt restlessly. She woke screaming at 3 a.m., crying for her other mom, begging to go home. For weeks, Sarah's stories grew more precise. She talked about a toy chest carved with flowers, a spiral stairwell behind a closet door, a tiny scar on her other hand that she didn't have on this one. Michael and Linda wrestled with disbelief. Was it imagination? Something she picked up on TV, a trick of memory. One weekend, Michael quietly researched seaside towns within a day's drive. To his astonishment, he found one that matched some of Sarah's mentions, a small coastal community in Massachusetts. There was a Maple Street intersecting Ash Avenue. Without telling her why, the parents bundled Sarah into the car and drove 6 hours east. When they reached the town, they pulled over at a gas station. "Where do we go now, honey?" Linda asked. Sarah gazed out the window, then pointed. "That way, toward the sea." She led them turn by turn through winding neighborhoods. Finally, she stopped, her little hand pressed against the window. "There, that's where I live." It was a pale yellow house with peeling paint, shutters faded from salt air. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "She's not there anymore, is she?" The parents hesitated but approached the house. A woman in her 50s answered. Linda, trembling, explained they were traveling, that their daughter seemed drawn to the home. The woman looked baffled but invited them inside. The moment they stepped in, Sarah bolted forward. She ran to the living room and yanked the curtains open. "Blue, just like before," she cried. She tapped the brick fireplace. "See? Broken on the left side." Michael's knees nearly buckled. The owner stared at the child. Her face paled. Slowly she said, "A little girl lived here. She died in a fire. It was 20 years ago. She would have been about your daughter's age now." Linda gripped Sarah tightly, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, unshaken, simply said, "That was me, but I'm okay now." The owner revealed one last detail. Behind the hall closet was a narrow stairwell, long, sealed shut. When Michael checked, there it was, exactly where Sarah had claimed. For days after the visit, Sarah was quieter. She stopped mentioning the other life. But sometimes Linda would catch her gazing at the sky with an expression far older than 6 years. One evening, Linda tucked her in and whispered, "Sweetheart, do you still think about your other mom?" Sarah looked up calmly. "Not anymore." I said goodbye. "Goodbye?" Linda asked. Sarah nodded. "I left her a flower. That way she can sleep. I don't need to remember anymore." And just like that, the memories ended. Sarah never again spoke of the seaside town. Michael and Linda told no one. Not their friends, not their families, not even Sarah when she grew older. They were terrified of what people would think. But privately, Michael printed old newspaper records. He found the story. A fire in 1983 had claimed the life of a 6-year-old girl in that exact house. The photo matched Sarah's descriptions. A toy chest carved with flowers, a scar on her left hand. He closed the files and hid them in a drawer. He never showed Sarah. Sarah is grown now. She remembers nothing of the trip, but her parents do. And sometimes when she laughs in a certain way, Linda feels a shiver, because it's the same laugh described in those articles from decades ago. Maybe reincarnation is real. Maybe it was a glitch, a memory leak between lives. Or maybe children see more than we dare to believe. All Michael and Linda know is that once, their little girl carried the memory of a life that wasn't hers, and for a short, haunting time, the past spoke through her voice. Anthony, a 42-year-old software consultant, boarded Flight 237 from Dallas to Chicago on a gray February morning. The flight was routine for him. He traveled this route dozens of times a year. But that morning, as he stepped into the cabin, something unsettled him. The smell hit first, not the usual recycled air and faint perfume, but something older, stale, like newspapers and cigarette smoke. He glanced around. The seats looked worn, upholstery a different pattern than usual. Passengers dressed strangely, one man in a brown suit and fedora, a woman in a long floral dress, as though stepping from another era. Anthony laughed nervously to himself, muttering, "Airline retro day?" But when he found his seat, 14C, his laughter died, because etched faintly into the tray table was a set of initials. AR, his initials. As the plane lifted, turbulence rattled the cabin. Anthony tried to distract himself by talking to the passenger beside him, an elderly man with sharp blue eyes. "Business trip?" the man asked. "Yes, Chicago. You?" The man smiled. "Funny, you asked me that last time," Anthony frowned. "Last time?" The man leaned closer. "We've sat together before. Same flight, same seats, different year." Anthony's pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" The man tapped the armrest. "Look outside. You'll see it soon." And Anthony did. Below the clouds, a town spread out that wasn't supposed to be there. A patchwork of streets, a water tower, a drive-in theater. Structures that hadn't existed in decades. Midway through, the captain's voice crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making an unscheduled landing." The plane descended. Anthony pressed his face to the window. The runway below was cracked, weeds sprouting through concrete. Abandoned hangars flanked the strip, yet the plane touched down smoothly. Passengers filed out calmly, as though expecting it. Anthony followed, dazed, into a terminal frozen in time. Faded posters advertised movies from 1971. Payphones lined the wall. A vending machine sold sodas for a dime. He whispered, "This is impossible." The old man beside him simply nodded. "You've been here before, Anthony. You just don't remember." Wandering the terminal, Anthony picked up a discarded newspaper. The date, February 11th, 1971. The headline, Flight 237, lost over Midwest storm. All 64 aboard presumed dead. His chest tightened. He scanned the passenger list. Near the bottom, Anthony R., 29, his own name, different age. He dropped the paper, trembling. Passengers around him began fading, clothes blurring, faces losing detail. Only a few remained solid. Himself, the old man, and a young woman clutching a baby. The man whispered, "Some of us keep circling back. Some land twice. You're one of them." Alarms blared. A voice called passengers back to the plane. Anthony resisted, but the old man's grip was iron. "It doesn't matter what you choose. You'll land twice, always." The cabin lights dimmed as he sat back in 14C. Turbulence shook violently. His head spun. The world smeared. Then, clarity, bright sunlight, a normal Chicago runway. Passengers chatting casually, scrolling on phones. No retro clothes, no newspaper from 1971. Anthony stumbled into the terminal. Everything modern, everything as it should be, except in his pocket was a dime soda coin, tarnished with age. Anthony never told anyone, but sometimes, when boarding Flight 237, he'd see the old man already seated, smiling knowingly. He started avoiding that route altogether. Yet nightmares haunted him, dreams of looping through skies, landing over and over at airports that didn't exist anymore. And every year, on February 11th, his phone buzzed with a missed call. No number, just the same message left on voicemail. "We landed." It was 2015 in Phoenix, Arizona. David, a 27-year-old mechanic, lived alone in a small second-floor apartment. One summer evening, as he cooked dinner, his cell phone rang. The number on the screen made him freeze. It was his own number. His exact digits, his exact caller ID. At first, he thought it was some scam trick, but something in his gut told him to answer. Against better judgment, he swiped. "Hello," he said cautiously. For a few seconds, there was only static. Then a voice came through. His own voice, calm, steady, and unmistakably his. "Don't leave the house tonight." David dropped the phone. His knees went weak. The line cut. When he checked again, there was no call log, no incoming record, just empty space. His mind raced. Was it a prank, a hacked phone, or something worse. He sat at his table, dinner untouched, staring at the screen. He kept replaying the voice. It wasn't similar. It was identical. Even the way the word "tonight" dragged slightly at the end, a quirk David had always hated about his own speech. Finally, he laughed nervously. "This is stupid." He grabbed his keys and decided to go out for a drive, if only to prove nothing weird was happening. But the moment he reached his door, something heavy pressed on his chest. His hand froze on the knob. He remembered the warning, "Don't leave the house tonight." He stepped back. Something deep inside him whispered, "Listen." At 11:42 p.m., David sat on his couch, wide awake, lights off. Then came the screech, tires outside, followed by a deafening crash. He rushed to the window. At the intersection right outside his apartment, two cars had collided violently. One flipped onto its roof. Smoke and sparks filled the street. His stomach churned, because if he had followed his original plan, that's the exact route he would have driven. The timing matched perfectly. His phone buzzed on the table. Another call. His own number again. Hands trembling, David answered. Static again. Then the voice. His voice. "You stayed. Good. You'll understand more soon." David stammered into the receiver. "Who are you? What do you want?" Silence. Then in a chilling monotone, "I'm trying to fix what breaks." The call ended. This time there was a log. His number. Incoming call. He tried redialing. It went straight to his own voicemail. In the weeks that followed, David never told anyone. He saved screenshots of the call log, proof he wasn't insane. But late at night, he sometimes dreams of himself, older, more tired, holding the same phone, whispering warnings across time. He wakes up drenched in sweat, wondering if one day he will be the voice making the call. And when his phone rings at odd hours now, David hesitates, because the scariest sound in the world isn't a stranger's voice, it's your own. Rachel, a school teacher in Portland, walked into a grocery store one rainy evening. As she entered, she nearly collided with a woman exiting. They both froze, because the woman looked exactly like Rachel. Same haircut, same jacket, even the same canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder. Rachel laughed nervously. "That's weird. We're dressed the same." But the other woman didn't laugh. She just looked at Rachel with wide, terrified eyes, whispered, "You're not supposed to be here," and pushed past her into the rain. Shaken, Rachel wandered the aisles, half convinced she imagined it. She eventually reached the checkout counter. The cashier bagged her items, then asked casually, "Forgot something? You were just here 10 minutes ago, remember?" Rachel's heart sank. "No, I just walked in." The cashier gave her a confused look. "I swear you came through. Same jacket, same bag. You even bought the same almond milk." He reached for the receipt still pinned to the counter. It bore Rachel's name on the rewards number, the timestamp, 10 minutes before she'd entered. She rushed home through the rain, groceries trembling in her arms. Her key turned in the lock. She froze. Voices inside. Her voice. Laughter. A TV show humming. She slammed the door open. Inside, sitting casually on the couch, was herself. Same face, same clothes, same damp hair from the rain. The other Rachel turned slowly, shocked. Almond milk carton on the coffee table. For a moment, both women stared, mirrors breathing in sync. Then the other Rachel whispered, almost pleading, "Please don't stay. If we're both here, it'll tear." The lights flickered. The room warped, edges bending like heat waves. Rachel screamed, stumbling backward. The other Rachel rose, clutching her head as if in pain. "Go!" she shrieked. Rachel bolted into the hallway. Behind her, she heard glass shatter, furniture collapse. When she finally turned, the apartment was dark and silent. Only one almond milk carton remained on the table. Hers. She never saw the other version of herself again. She changed apartments, quit her job, moved across town. But every time she shops for groceries, she double-checks the receipt. She makes sure it only prints once. Because if reality can't decide where you belong, it might try to split you in two. And if it ever does, you won't know which version of you survives. The Bennett family didn't plan on stopping. It was July of 1998, and Mark and Diane Bennett had packed their two teenagers, 15-year-old Alex and 12-year-old Claire, into the family's navy blue station wagon for a summer road trip from Missouri to California. They wanted to avoid interstates, to see the real America. That sounded charming in the morning, but by late afternoon, the two-lane highways felt endless. The kids were restless, the radio was all static, and the gas gauge hovered just above empty. Mark leaned forward, scanning the horizon for a gas station. Nothing but flat fields stretching into haze. Then, finally, a green highway sign appeared out of nowhere. Dunwich, 12 miles. Claire groaned. Never heard of it. Is that even real? Mark grinned. If it sells gas, it's real enough. They turned off onto a narrow county road lined with thick woods. The sun dropped lower. What should have been 12 miles stretched into a winding half hour. Just as Diane started to suggest turning back, lights appeared through the trees. A town, small, old-fashioned, but glowing warmly against the dusk. Neon signs flickered. Storefronts lined Main Street. Children ran past, chasing a ball. And at the far end, a red and white diner buzzed with life. Relief washed over the Bennetts. They had no idea this would be the strangest night of their lives. The first stop was a little service station just inside the town limits. Two ancient pumps stood beneath a rusted canopy. A bell rang as the wagon rolled in. A tall, lanky man in oil-stained overalls stepped out from the garage. He looked mid-40s, face weathered but kind. He wiped his hands on a rag and smiled. "Evening. Haven't seen travelers in a while. Fill her up?" Mark nodded gratefully. "Yeah, regular unleaded, please." The attendant set the nozzle and glanced at the kids in the back seat. "Passing through? Heading to California," Diane said. "We're lucky we found you. We were running on fumes." The man chuckled. "Dunwich takes care of folks. You'll sleep better here than on the road." Mark found that odd. Sleep better here? But he let it slide. As the attendant worked, Alex whispered, "Dad, look." The pump, the meter ticked upward. 25 cents. 30 cents, 35 cents per gallon. Prices decades out of date. Mark swallowed hard. He paid in cash. The attendant tipped his cap politely and waved them off. They didn't realize until later the pump had never clicked. The tank wasn't really full. The Bennetts parked outside the diner. A neon sign flickered. Ruth's Place. Best pie in town. Inside, booths were packed with locals. Men in suspenders, women in floral dresses, kids slurping sodas. A jukebox crooned an old tune from the 1950s. The air smelled of coffee and fried food. A waitress in her 20s, hair braided neatly, approached with menus. Her smile was warm, almost too warm. "Where you folks headed?" she asked, pouring coffee. "California," Mark answered. She nodded thoughtfully. "Storm's coming tonight. You'll be safer staying in Dunwich." Diane raised an eyebrow. "Do you have a motel?" The waitress pointed down Main Street. "You'll see the sign. Can't miss it." The family ordered burgers and pie. Everything tasted incredible, too incredible, as if every bite was designed to soothe exhaustion. Even the kids went quiet, eating contently. As they left, the waitress slipped Claire a small candy wrapped in wax paper. "For sweet dreams," she whispered. Claire tucked it into her pocket. Years later, she'd swear that candy never unwrapped itself, no matter how many times she tried. The motel sat at the end of Main Street. A faded wooden sign read, "The Dunwich Inn, vacancy." Inside, the lobby was dim, lit by a single lamp. Behind the desk sat a clerk in a pressed vest, writing carefully in a massive ledger book. He looked up with a stiff smile. "Evening. Rooms available. 2 doubles?" Mark nodded. The clerk slid the ledger across. "Names, please." Each Bennett wrote neatly on the yellowed pages. Mark, Diane, Alex, Claire. The clerk handed them 2 brass keys, heavy and cold. As they headed upstairs, Claire tugged her mom's sleeve. The book had so many names, some from forever ago. Why keep them all? Diane smiled weakly. Small towns like history. But when Mark glanced back, the clerk was still staring at their names, his pen hovering just above, as if ready to rewrite them. Upstairs, the rooms were plain but clean. Beds stiff, curtains floral, a faint smell of mothballs. The family fell asleep quickly, lulled by the quiet hum of Dunwich. None of them noticed the sound outside their windows. windows, the steady rhythm of footsteps pacing up and down Main Street, all through the night. Sleep in the Dunwich Inn did not come easy, though the beds were stiff and the air heavy with mothballs. What truly unsettled the Bennets were the sounds outside. Mark awoke first, just after midnight. He thought he heard voices on the street below, dozens of voices, chanting in low, rhythmic tones. He crept to the window. Main Street stretched quiet and empty. No cars, no people. Yet the sound persisted, faint like a crowd just beyond sight. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth directly under their window. He pressed his forehead to the glass, searching, but saw nothing but shadows and lamplight. Behind him, Claire stirred. "Daddy, why are there people outside?" His blood ran cold. "You hear them too?" She nodded, eyes wide. "They're calling my name." Mark yanked the curtains shut. Neither he nor Claire slept again that night. At breakfast, the family tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was wind, maybe imagination. The inn's dining room offered muffins and orange juice. Other guests sat quietly, eating with mechanical calm. The braided hair waitress from the diner the night before appeared, pouring coffee like she belonged here too. She leaned toward Diane. "Storm passed us by," she said softly. "Lucky you stayed." Diane forced a smile. "Yes, very lucky." But outside the sky was cloudless. No rain, no lightning, no storm debris. Just a blazing sun over a town too quiet for comfort. Mark suggested they check out, refill the car, and keep driving. But when they walked to the desk, the clerk was gone. The ledger book sat closed, brass keys resting atop it. Mark flipped the book open. Their names were there, but the ink had faded, as if written decades ago. They stepped into the street. Dunwich was gone. The same buildings stood, but hollow. Storefront windows were shattered, signs dangled by rusted chains. The diner's neon sign hung dead, letters cracked. The smell of pie, grease, and coffee had been replaced by mildew and dust. The gas station pumps were toppled, weeds bursting through concrete. The toy store Claire had seen glowing last night was boarded up, its painted sign nearly illegible. Alex muttered, "This isn't the same place," but it was. Every building matched, every street corner. The only difference was time, like the town had aged 50 years overnight. Mark touched the hood of their car. It was coated in dust, as if it had sat there abandoned for decades. Panicked, the family piled into the wagon. Mark turned the key. It started, but the gas gauge hovered just above empty again, despite last night's fill-up. They drove down Main Street, past hollow-eyed windows. The road out of town stretched forward, then abruptly ended. Where asphalt should have led them back to the highway, there was only cracked dirt and tangled weeds. The green highway sign they'd followed into town was gone. Diane whispered, "Mark, how do we get out?" Before he could answer, Claire gasped. She pulled the wax-wrapped candy from her pocket, the one the waitress had given her. It was still perfectly new, bright, fresh, and stamped on the wrapper were 3 words in neat red ink. "Welcome back, Claire." Mark drove in circles. Every road out of Dunwich ended in dead grass, collapsed bridges, or trees so dense they looked like painted walls. The gas gauge dropped lower with every turn. Finally, desperate, he pulled into a side street lined with sagging houses. Most looked abandoned, shutters hanging loose, yards overtaken by weeds. But one porch light glowed faintly. On the steps sat an old man in suspenders, rocking slowly in a chair. His face was pale, eyes distant, but he smiled as the car pulled up. Diane lowered the window. "Sir, do you know how we get back to the highway?" The man's rocking stopped. His smile widened. "Highway?" He chuckled dryly. "Highway's gone. Only way out is when Dunwich lets you." The family exchanged terrified looks. Claire whispered, "Ask him, when does it let people out?" The man's eyes slid toward her. "When you've left your name in the book." They sped back to the motel. The lobby was darker now, dust coating the desk, but the ledger still lay open. Mark flipped to their page. Their names were there. Mark Bennett, Diane Bennett, Alex Bennett, Claire Bennett, dated July 12, 1998. But below their names were dozens more, stretching back through time. Families, couples, travelers, some dates recent, some over 100 years old, and next to each name was a faint word written in the margin. Stayed, stayed, stayed. Diane slammed the book shut. "We're leaving," but Claire clutched her mother's hand. Her voice was small. "What if we already stayed?" The lights flickered. From upstairs Upstairs came the sound of footsteps, heavy, synchronized, moving toward the stairs. The family bolted for the car. Mark turned the key. The engine coughed, then roared to life. He floored it down Main Street, past the silent diner, past the lifeless gas station. As they drove, the buildings warped, windows stretched like melting glass, street lamps bent inward, their glow flickering in sync with the car's headlights. The sky itself seemed to ripple. Suddenly, the green highway sign appeared. Dunwich, 12 miles. They burst through the trees, and the world snapped back. The open highway stretched ahead. Wind rushed through the windows. The gas gauge, inexplicably, now showed full. The kids cheered, but Mark's hands gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles whitened, because when he glanced in the rearview mirror, Dunwich was gone. Not fading into distance, not swallowed by trees, simply gone. The family bolted for the car. Mark turned the key. The engine coughed, then roared to life. He floored it down Main Street, past the silent diner, past the lifeless gas station. As they drove, the buildings warped, windows stretched like melting glass, street lamps bent inward, their glow flickering in sync with the car's headlights. The sky itself seemed to ripple. Suddenly, the green highway sign appeared. Dunwich, 12 miles. They burst through the trees, and the world snapped back. The open highway stretched ahead. Wind rushed through the windows. The gas gauge, inexplicably, now showed full. The kids cheered, but Mark's hands gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles whitened, because when he glanced in the rearview mirror, Dunwich was gone. Not fading into distance, not swallowed by trees, simply gone. The Bennetts never spoke of it on the rest of the trip. By California, they'd convinced themselves it was exhaustion, a dream, a shared hallucination. Until 10 years later, Diane wandered into an antique shop while visiting family in Oklahoma. On a dusty shelf, she froze. There lay a cracked, leather-bound ledger book. Her hands trembled as she opened it, pages yellowed with age, names written neatly in ink, travelers from across decades. And there, on the page dated July 12, 1998, she found them. Mark Bennett, Diane Bennett, Alex Bennett, Claire Bennett, the same handwriting, the same faded ink. When Diane asked the shopkeeper where it came from, he shrugged. Old motel estate sale, place burned down long ago. Dunwich Inn, I think it was called. Diane bought the ledger, locked it in their family safe, and never told the children. But every year on July 12th, she dreams of the braided hair waitress leaning close, whispering the same words she said that first night. Be careful on the road tonight. Storm's coming. And when she wakes, she swears she can smell pie cooling on the windowsill. In 2003, Jeremy was 19 and new to Denver, working late shifts at a warehouse. One night after his car broke down, he decided to walk home. It was past midnight when he cut through an unfamiliar neighborhood. The streets were unusually quiet, houses dark except for one. A small, two-story house at the corner glowed warmly with lights. Curtains fluttered in the upstairs window. And then as Jeremy passed, a voice called out from inside. A woman's voice, soft, calm, and unmistakably direct. Jeremy, you're late. He froze on the sidewalk. No one here should know his name. His first instinct was to run, but curiosity anchored him. Slowly, he stepped onto the walkway. The front door opened a crack on its own, creaking. A faint smell drifted out, something like baked bread mixed with old dust. He whispered, "Hello?" The woman's voice again, drifting from upstairs. "Come in, Jeremy. We've been waiting." His chest tightened. "We." He stepped inside, against all logic. The living room was cozy but outdated. Floral wallpaper peeling at the edges, a lamp buzzing in the corner. Family portraits lined the wall. But here's what made him stop cold. In one of the frames was him, Jeremy, as a child smiling on a tricycle. Footsteps creaked overhead. Jeremy's hands shook as he reached for the banister. Each step up the staircase felt heavy, like he was wading into water. At the top, a single door stood slightly open. Light spilled out, and the woman's voice sang softly, like a lullaby. Jeremy nudged the door open. Inside was a small bedroom. A rocking chair faced the window. It creaked back and forth, but no one sat in it. On the bed lay a set of clothes, his exact warehouse uniform, neatly folded. A whisper slipped out of the air itself. "You don't belong out there." Stay where you were meant to be. His fight or flight finally kicked in. Jeremy bolted down the stairs. Behind him, the rocking chair slammed to a stop. The air grew colder, the walls seeming to breathe. He burst through the front door into the night. When he turned back, the house was dark, silent, no lights, no open door, just another boarded-up home, windows cracked, grass overgrown. He stumbled back to the street, gasping, nearly collapsing. Weeks later, unable to let it go, Jeremy returned to that corner in daylight. The house was still there, but completely abandoned. A neighbor, raking leaves, told him no one had lived there since 1979. Jeremy's voice trembled as he asked, "Who lived there?" The man shrugged. "Family died in a fire. Only survivor was a boy, same age as you'd have been. Name was Jeremy. Jeremy never walked that route again, but every so often he dreams of that house. And in the dream, someone upstairs whispers, 'Welcome home.'" In 2011, Clara was in Chicago for a teachers' conference. She checked into a downtown hotel, an old grand building with brass elevators and creaky halls. Exhausted, she pressed the elevator button for her assigned floor, 14. But as the doors closed, something strange caught her eye. Below 14, above the lobby, there was an extra button, faded, barely legible. It read M. Curiosity tugged. She pressed it. The elevator shuddered, hummed, and began moving downward, not to the lobby, but to a place in between. When the doors slid open, Clara stepped into a hallway she couldn't believe. Dim yellow lights flickered. The carpet was patterned, but frayed and burned in places. The wallpaper peeled in long strips. The air smelled stale, like rot and dust. Doors lined both sides. Every one had peeling gold numbers, 2M, 3M, 4M. She walked cautiously, suitcase wheels rattling against the floor. Halfway down the hall, she froze. A door at the far end was ajar. From inside came faint music, a phonograph, playing a song that hadn't been popular in half a century. She pushed the door open. Inside was a lounge, velvet chairs, a broken chandelier, a dusty piano, and people, not modern guests, but silhouettes of men in bowler hats, women in long gowns seated silently, their faces blurred and faceless like melted wax. They all turned toward her at once. Clara stumbled backward, heart hammering. A faceless waiter mannequin shuffled forward, holding a tray. On it sat a glass with a folded slip of paper. Her trembling hands picked it up. The note read, "You weren't supposed to find us." Panic surged. She bolted from the room, down the hall, suitcase banging against her leg. The faceless figures rose in unison, footsteps echoing behind her. She sprinted into the elevator, slammed the lobby button, and prayed. The doors shut just as a hand, or something like it, brushed against her arm. The elevator plummeted. Her ears popped. When the doors opened again, she was in the lobby, bright, crowded, ordinary. The concierge gave her a puzzled look. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Shaking, she stumbled to her room. In the safety of her bed, she reached into her pocket. The slip of paper was still there. The words hadn't changed. "You weren't supposed to find us." The next morning, she returned to the elevator with a coworker, but the M button was gone. No faded lettering, no hidden floor. Years later, Clara still has the note in a shoebox hidden away. She doesn't show it to anyone, because deep down she's afraid that if she acknowledges it again, the faceless guests might remember her. It was a cold winter night in Chicago. A college student named Daniel boarded the last train heading north. He slid into an empty carriage, except for one other man. The man sat across the aisle, dressed in an old gray coat, his head tilted down, humming a tune that Daniel didn't recognize. It was eerie, but oddly calming. The train rattled along, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Daniel thought nothing of it until he realized they had passed 3 stations and the man hadn't moved an inch. At the next stop, Daniel glanced up from his phone. The train doors opened, hissed, then closed again, but the humming gone. He looked to the side. The man's seat was completely empty. No sound of footsteps, no door opening, just gone. The train car was silent except for the mechanical screech of wheels on tracks. Daniel's stomach twisted. He got up, walked the aisle, aisle, checked every seat. No one. The conductor even told him, "Son, you're the only passenger here tonight." Daniel returned to his seat, unsettled. That's when he noticed something lying where the man had been sitting, a folded ticket stub. Daniel picked it up. The paper felt brittle, yellowed with age. Printed on it was a date, October 14th, 1978. His chest tightened. He hadn't been alive then. For a moment he wondered if he was hallucinating, but the texture of the paper was real beneath his fingertips. Daniel kept that ticket for years, locked in a drawer. Later, when he showed it to his father, his dad froze. "I used to ride that line in the late 70s, his father whispered. "That date, that was the night of the fire. One passenger never made it off. Daniel never took the train again. But every time he sees the old stub, he hears that faint humming in the back of his head, a melody from a passenger who never should have been there." If you ever sit alone on a train and you hear someone humming behind you, check twice before you breathe easy. Some passengers may not belong to this decade. It was past midnight in Boston. Emily, a nurse finishing her night shift, walked down a quiet street when she spotted a little girl standing at the crosswalk. She was maybe 7, wearing a faded red dress and holding a stuffed rabbit. Tears streaked her cheeks. Emily's instincts kicked in. She rushed forward, kneeling beside her. "Sweetheart, are you lost?" she whispered. The girl sniffled, then smiled through the tears. The light turned green. Before Emily could stop her, the girl ran into the street. Emily screamed, heart pounding, waiting for headlights and impact. But as the girl reached the middle of the road, she vanished. No sound, no trace. The rabbit she held was gone too. Cars passed normally, drivers honking at Emily for standing frozen in the crosswalk. Her legs shook violently as she staggered back to the sidewalk. The next morning at work, Emily told a fellow nurse what she had seen. Her co-worker's face drained of color. That girl, people have seen her before. 20 years ago, the child was struck right at that crossing. Some say she still appears to people walking home late. Emily couldn't believe it, but deep down, she knew what she saw wasn't imagination. That evening, Emily returned to the spot with a bouquet of flowers. She placed them by the streetlight and whispered, "Rest easy, little one." As she turned to leave, the pedestrian signal flickered strangely. Green, red, then green again. It felt like a thank you. To this day, Emily says she never fears walking that road at night because sometimes when she passes the crossing, she hears faint footsteps beside her, light, childlike, and never threatening. Marcus, a factory worker in Detroit, always took the same shortcut through an alley. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he noticed something strange. The graffiti he passed daily was gone. The air smelled like coal smoke, and the cars rolling by the end of the street looked ancient, like something out of an old photograph. Confused, Marcus stumbled into a small diner at the corner. The bell above the door jingled. Inside, men in fedoras and women in 1960s dresses turned to stare. The cash register wasn't digital. The jukebox hummed with Elvis. But what terrified Marcus most was that the customers were staring at him as if he was the intruder. Panicked, he bolted out of the diner and ran back through the alley. The moment he crossed, everything shifted back. Modern cars, modern graffiti, the sound of distant traffic. He collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. Shaking, Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a receipt. Printed on it was Grant's Diner, July 1964. The paper was yellow, the ink fading. That diner had been demolished decades ago. Marcus still keeps the receipt in a glass case, proof of the day he walked through a hole in time. He never returned to that alley, but whenever he dreams, Marcus hears that jukebox, soft, distorted, as if calling him back. He wonders what would have happened if he'd stayed.